Hello, my name is Don Schnitzler. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Forest History Association of Wisconsin, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the April presentation for our 2023 webinar series. To aid in the success of this webinar, please note that any questions you may have for our presenter that come up during the presentation, you can pose them via the chat feature likely located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will relay the questions to the speaker at the end of the presentation. If you're new to Zoom or have any challenges navigating the system tonight, please use that same chat feature to post the questions, and I will watch for them and see what I can do from my end. And finally, be aware that you will receive a follow-up email from Zoom with a link for an evaluation form about tonight's webinar. Please reflect on the webinar and then provide us with some feedback to help us plan future events. This evening's presentation is titled Photos from Central Wisconsin's Past, Logging Images of Southwestern Marathon and Northeastern Clark Counties. Along with much of the state of Wisconsin, Southwestern Marathon and Northeastern Clark Counties at the turn of the 19th century relied on the lumber industry to support the local economy. Cutting the standing timber, loading and hauling the fallen logs, and sawing them into lumber at mills were all common scenes. In this presentation, our speaker will share images of that activity from his personal collection of 4 central Wisconsin communities: Romeo, Osborn, Unity, and Cherokee. And he will point those out to you on a map so we all know where they're at. Our speaker tonight is Al Gurtner. He is someone familiar to members of the Forest History Association, as he is a fellow member. He is also a Central Wisconsin local historian and recently authored his first book, Visions of the Past, A Village Called Unity, published in 2022. I'm anxious to see what Al has to share with us tonight, and so I'm pleased to turn the platform over to our speaker, Al Gurtner, for this evening's presentation. Al?
Thank you, Don. I appreciate the kind words, and hopefully I can do well with this. It's my first attempt at anything like this, so we'll see what happens.
Do fine.
All right. So good evening, everybody. I've gathered together some pictures of our local area where I live and grew up, and 4 little towns that there's not much left of anymore. And some people have never heard of them, even people that live in the area. So I started doing this about 23 years ago, and it just kind of snowballed into what you'll see here. So the next book I'm working on writing will be a Ripplinger Romeo Waterman community book. And so some of these pictures, these are only the logging pictures from that. I have a lot more of other happenings in that area. But having said that, I'll go ahead with the first picture here, just kind of outlining the area that I'm going to focus on here tonight. If you can see my cursor moving here, right about in the center of the screen is Unity. That's the little town that I grew up in. And then off to the west, southwest a little bit here, is a town called Osborn, and later about 1925 it was renamed Ripplinger. And so anybody looking for this will now know it as Ripplinger. Coming back to the south of Unity along Highway 13, here we got the little community of Romeo, and that's one of the towns. There's nothing left there anymore, and so it'll be interesting for you to see some of the sawmilling activity that was there. Just north of there, even though I don't have anything on it, there was another little community called Huffman. We haven't found much on that, but it does show up in state road maps. So that's something I'm still anxiously looking for. And then the 4th town that I'm going to be talking about tonight is just straight east of Colby, about 5 miles east of Colby on Highway N is a little community there that's called Cherokee, and most notably the only thing that's really left there is a Cherokee County Park. And so, but at one time it was a thriving little town, like most all of these were. The only thing really going yet is unity of all of those, with any type of business. Cherokee has an implement dealership. Osborn has, of course, a tavern. That's always the last one to go. And so Romeo has nothing. So hopefully you guys will learn a little bit about these little towns. So my first town that we're going to talk about here tonight is Romeo. And as Don has put up on the screen here, was established in 1878. This continued in 1888 and then reestablished 1889. This continued in 1892, largely due to numerous fires that burnt the whole town down 2 or 3 times. And so they finally had enough of that. And and the businesses, other than the sawmilling, the sawmills remained, and so did a cheese factory that was there, in the school, of course, but other than that, the other businesses kind of went by the wayside. So on the screen here is Highway 13 runs this dotted line here is Highway 13. And then on this line that goes to the right is now Highway 153. That'll take you to Stratford, Wisconsin, if you go east at that corner. And so right now, the only thing left there is that's any recognition of where this would have been is a big feed mill. A Purina feed mill has been in there since the 50s or 60s. And that's really, everyone knows where I'm talking about based on when I say by the feed mill. Like I say, it was between between Unity and Spencer on Highway 13 and 153. And back in its day in the 1880s, it contained a couple of sawmills, a boarding house, a school, a church, a store, and a cheese factory, and some various residences. But largely all of that is gone now. So, but that's just an overview of where the Romeo is. So starting with our first picture here. This is a picture I had come across from a lady named Lila Anderson. She lived right in Romeo. There's many Andersons in the Romeo area, and there still is. So on the back of this photo, it said Charles J. Nelson, Unity, Wisconsin, written in pencil on the back. It's believed to be in the Romeo area just because of the collection of pictures that I'd received from Lila. She doesn't know any of the men. Possibly one of the men could be Charles Nelson. We don't know why that was written on the back. So you'd have to assume that he could be one of the men. I don't know just if they're loading or unloading, but I'm guessing they're with the McGifford loader in the background. They're going to be taking the decked logs, putting them onto rail cars, and probably hauling them to a sawmill in Romeo. Unfortunately, nobody wrote anything other than that on the back, so we don't know for sure. But anyway, then our next picture. William Van Hoosier was a sawmill operator early on in Romeo. He also was associated with the mill in Unity in partnership with DJ Spalding at one point in time. And so back in the days when they're doing this stuff, we're assuming he's taking them to the Van Hoosier mill because that was the earliest one. And so this photo is believed to be a spur where the logs were decked to be taken to the mill in Romeo for the Joseph Weeks Lumber Company. Joseph Weeks Lumber Company had a lot of land in the Romeo area. And so it's presumed that this is what we're looking at, that they had skidded the logs to this landing. And then we're in the process of decking them onto the rail car spur to get them into Romeo to the mill. Okay, now this is the next picture here. This is a picture of the Romeo mill. And we're unsure if this is the Van Hoosier mill. I actually think it's the John Anderson sawmill in Romeo, but there's nothing written on it at all. So it's hard to say, but Lila Anderson also had this picture. And so we figure this is a sawmill that belonging to John Anderson. There was many Andersons in the Romeo area, and there's still a sawmill east of this intersection about 2 miles on Highway 153, run by Roger Anderson. And so, again, the Anderson name is still in use in what was Romeo. So kind of a neat picture. Okay, this one here, this camp picture was in with Lila's stack of pictures that she let me copy and gave to me. Again, there's nothing written on the picture, but being its proximity to Romeo, we were assuming it's part of a Joseph Week logging camp, probably to the east of Romeo somewhere. He had quite a bit of land in the area, and so it's presumed this is one of the camps. It's really a great image of a typical Wisconsin lumberjack camp. You know, everybody's posing and got their best clothes on for a Sunday picture, but just too bad nobody writes anything on the back of these sometimes. So, okay, so then the next one here, again, this was a part of the same collection, I believe, from Lila Anderson. This photo shows men decking the logs onto the rail cars, and it could be a same location as a few pictures back where they had the big landing. It could just be a different angle or totally somewhere else in the area, but they're decking the logs, skidding them up and putting them onto the rail car with horses, cross hauling them, and believed to be heading to the sawmill in Romeo. There's very faint writing on the back of the picture in pencil that said CJ Vogt, VOGT, Unity, Wisconsin. And in our researching of Unity, he has come up lots of times. He was a very prominent businessman with several different ventures in the Unity area around 1900. So again, we don't know whether he's in the photos or if he just wanted everybody to know that was his picture and not if in case he borrowed it to somebody, he knew to get it back. Still a pretty neat picture. This one here, I actually know who one of the men is in the picture. This is an interior photo of a Joseph Week lumber camp. This I know for a fact, of their kitchen and dining hall. The man on the right, his name is Mogan Shannon. He was born in 1875 out west of Osborn to the Culinaires family, and his grandparents were the Air family. And so he worked as a camp cook for many years for the Joseph Week Lumber Company. I don't know just what year this is. We've tried to scan on that calendar picture to the right of him and just can't make out the date on the calendar, but we think it says the Harwig, Harwig, Harwig brothers on the top of the calendar. And then it's kind of hard to make out until you look, but there's a mounted deer head right to the right of the calendar and just kind of blends in with the wall there. So it's kind of interesting that would be there, but we do know that this is approximately late 1895 to 1900. And then again, there was Mogan's son, Merlin Shannon, that I interviewed that had this picture, and this was his father. So, okay, and this was also part of Merlin Shannon collection pictures, excuse me. And so we know this was another one of the Joseph Weeks camps somewhere east of Romeo. There was no writing on the picture, and Merlin didn't know any of the men in this picture. So his father isn't in the picture, but maybe someone else is that his dad knew probably, and so on. So we just don't know a location. Again, there was nothing written on the back, so we're unsure. This picture here is the man on the left in the picture with the white apron on is Merlin's dad, Mogan, again. Now you can tell he's a little older in this picture. And again, apparently he was a camp cook for the Joseph Weeks Lumber Company for 20, 30 years. That's what he did every winter. And so he was around for quite a while. And so it's believed, and that's what he believed, that this was there was a blacksmith shop or a horseshoeing shop there for the horses belonging to the camp. And so it could be even a horse stable. We're not sure, other than the fact that the arrow points to Mogan Shannon, and definitely part of the Weeks Lumber Company. Okay. This next picture is in Romeo, right in the village, piling sawed lumber up to dry, and you can tell they're stacking it so it sheds water. And I think this is a pretty early picture. So I believe this is part of the Hoosier Sawmill rather than the Anderson Sawmill. Again, we don't really know, but just judging by the clothing and the age of the photo, it just lends to believe that that's a really old picture from the late 1800s. Again, Hoosier, he had 3 different fires that wiped out his mills and lumber and pretty much everything in town. So after the 3rd one, he had enough, and he moved to California to get in on the gold rush stuff, and eventually that's where he died, in Hayward, California. And so he had a good intentions, but kept suffering losses every time, and he just finally had enough and moved away. So again, this is one of Merlin Shannon's photographs that he let me have. So very nice picture. This one came from Merlin Shannon also. And on the back of the picture, written in pencil, it said F. Knudsen, Unity, Clark County, Wisconsin, on the back of it. I'm not familiar with that name personally, but more than likely is one of the men in the picture. And judging by the oxen and the smallness of this, I'm guessing this is a pretty early, maybe a jobber for the Weeks Lumber Company, just to, do some individual logging. I'm not sure, but again, it was part of the Merlin Shannon collection, and his father logged for the Joseph Weeks Company. So that's all I really can say about it. Okay, this one here is another picture of Romeo with lumber piled, and it's hard to say if they're piling it or going to unpile it and put it on the train car, but the same Wisconsin Central line is there. It's the Sioux line and so on, and the railroad tracks are still there yet today. But it makes perfect sense to understand how easily a fire could start from how close the lumber is piled to the tracks, and any sparks from any of the locomotives, with their firebox, could easily jump to that dried lumber and start it up with no trouble at all. So we think this is part of the Hoosier Sawmill works from the late 1800s, just judging again by the same style of picture and dress as the earlier photo of the men piling the lumber. This one here, we know again who this person is. This is Merlin Shannon's dad, Mogan Shannon, and he is the second guy from the right with the cook apron on, and that was his job, was being camp cook. And so we don't know who the man holding the Gabriel is next to him, but it's kind of a neat picture showing that. And let's see. Again, no other people were mentioned in the picture other than we know that's Mogan Shannon, second from the right. Well, this picture here came from Merlin Shannon, and this was his dad's brother. So it'd be Merlin's uncle, Anton Shannon, on the very right with the dark clothing on. Excuse me. It's really unclear what they're doing here, because it looks like they have a 2-man crosscut saw on that little tree, but we don't know why they'd be sawing down such a little tree unless it's just posing for a picture. But either that or maybe they're just cutting some firewood or something. We don't know. But the only thing I know about that is that it's Antone Shannon. And he grew up in the Romeo area as well. So could be for the Weeks Lumber Company or could be for their own personal use. We don't know. But there's an oxen right in the center of the picture. He kind of blends in. But his yoke is around the neck and he's facing to the right. Kind of hard to pick out until you really see him there. Okay, these next four pictures, I don't know much about. And so they're part of the Shannon collection, but there's nothing written on any of them. But it's very clearly marked on each one of these that it says the J Brydon's Camp from 1892. And the photo was taken by N. Empey of Dorchester, which is just a little north of Colby, next town north of Colby and Abbotsford. So it's got to be in our local area. It's just we haven't figured out just who J Brydon is or where these pictures were actually taken. But we at least know they're from 1892, and it's especially evidenced by the oxen in the picture. That's usually a pretty dead giveaway. But so if anybody knows anything about J Brydon's Camp, by all means, let me know, because it's always been a source of interest, and nobody knows anything about the photographer or J Brydon. But these next four pictures are all of the same stuff. So here again, every one of them is marked J Brydon from 1892. Doing some nice logs there. We can only imagine that they're headed for the Romeo Sawmill, but we don't know at all. So to the next one again, they're logging with the horses and a couple of nice big logs on that pile there. No name again, so we don't know for sure, but I'd love to find out. This one intrigues me the most. It's just, I have no idea why these men would be standing. It looks like a boarding house. So I can't imagine that they would have stayed there, but I don't know either where this would have been or why they're standing there. It doesn't look like they're working too hard, but so if anybody knows where the Jaybright Camper and Empey from Dorchester photographer, by all means, get a hold of me afterwards, and I'd love to hear this story and put names to the faces here. So, okay. So now this is the John Anderson Sawmill in Romeo. Now this is later after Van Hoosier was gone. Anderson's built a sawmill there, and there was a couple different Andersons that had mills in the Romeo right immediate area. And then off to the right is the August and Carl Anderson farm. And so that gives credibility as to where this is. And we know for a fact then that that's Romeo. You know, this one was also, we knew this is 1919. Someone kind of scratched with a pen on there. It says the Romeo Mill crew in 1919 posing for a picture. This was part of Mel Ayers' photo collection, and he grew up in the area right near there and knew quite a few of these men, and he was in the process of writing down their names when he passed away. So I never did get their names, but he knew them all, and I wished I'd wrote it down on the spot when he first saw the picture. Here again is another photo of the John Anderson Sawmill in Romeo. And we believe that's John on the very left with the suspenders, standing with his knee kind of askew there. We believe one of the ladies with the hat on is his wife. There's no way to really know that for sure, but from other people that have looked at the picture, they were fairly certain that was the deal. So this was a Lila Anderson photo that she had in her collection. That's about it for Romeo sawmilling pictures. I have a lot more pictures of Romeo, but tonight's focus is just on the logging and lumbering in the area. So move on to the next town was originally called Osborn, And it was located west and south of Unity, as you can see in the picture. It was at one time just all very dense white pine forest in that area. So it was a very good spot to locate a sawmill. And the name was later changed to Ripplinger, part of the Ripplinger family that moved into the area. They felt a need to change the town to their name. It's interesting on this plat map that this was the 1916 plat map, I believe, and it's called Osborn, B-U-R-N, but that's clearly a typo because that's the only time I've ever seen it spelled that way. It was sometimes Osborn with an E on the end, but usually it was just O-S-B-O-R-N. And so these next pictures will tell you about Osborn or Ripplinger. So this photo on the very left, it says clearly Frank Nichols Camp, F. Nichols. Well, we know that to be Frank Nichols. And this camp was located a couple miles south of Osborn or Ripplinger. I switch back and forth, so forgive me if I call it one or the other. But it's located just a couple miles south of town. And so Frank Nichols was a subcontracted logger, we believe, through the Culinaires logging and the Truman Loney that you'll see coming up here. And this picture was part of the Mel Ayers photo collection. Now here's a picture of the sawmill crew at Osborn. This was dated on the back of 1898. None of the men in the picture are identified, but we do know that this is the Osborne Sawmill. And that was located right at the south edge of the town, just a quarter mile off the dead end road that still remains there today. Years ago, there used to be old concrete footings and things back in the woods, and I haven't been back there in years, so I don't know if any of that's still there, if it's been removed or what, but different people own it now than what owned it when I was a kid, so I just haven't bothered to ask permission to roam around in there. But anyway, and that's part of the Mel Ayers photo collection. This is another picture. You'll notice at the top of the logs there, it says F. Nichols Works. And again, that was the Frank Nichols. Frank is actually standing on top of the load, very top of the load, holding the reins in his hand. My friend Mel Ayers, that he knew Frank Nichols, he remembered him, and he knows that's who that is. So that load scaled 6,250 feet, and they were pretty proud of that. So again, and then now the next picture here is another view of the same load of logs. And again, that's Frank. Now he's sitting down this time instead of standing up, but he's still holding the reins in his hand. And at the top of the load, it says F. Nichols load. And down near the bottom, it says 6,250 board feet. So again, it's the same picture that I just showed you, just a closer up. Oh, excuse me, I had to wet my whistle there. Excuse me, this is a picture of Culinaires. He'd be the second person from the left, the tall man with the wide brim hat, holding the hand hook at an angle. His name was Culinaires, and he was a pioneer settler in Unity Township. And he amassed quite a bit of money through his business dealings and his logging and farming practices. And at one time he owned 840 acres of land out in the Unity Township. Excuse me. So I run across his name quite frequently throughout the Unity Township history and also Osborn / Ripplinger history. He had 11 children, one of them being Walter Ayre, and Walter's son was Mel Ayres, and Mel is who gave me this. So that would be his grandpa. And Mel knew the two guys on the right are brothers, and their last name was Durkee. like the seasoning, but he couldn't recall their first names. This next photo is also a picture of that same time period there with some of the same men, and they're just decking logs, piling them up, I suppose, to get them loaded onto rail cars at the time. There was no real substantial river. There's a small creek that runs through the area, but it's not anything big enough to be able to float logs to the mill. So everything had to be taken by rail car or by sleigh to the Osborn mill. And again, this was part of Mel Ayer's photo collection. Now, Culinaires, like I said, he had 11 children. One of his daughters' name was Belva, B-E-L-V-A, Belva Ayer, and she married a guy named Truman Loney. And so Truman Loney took over the sawmill in Osborn, and he's not, I don't think he's not in this picture, but Cullen is, and at the right-hand side, there's a couple of horses or oxen standing there, and Cullen is standing right behind them. So it's kind of hard to see, fits in right with the logs in the background, but Mel knew that was great grandpa Ayer with the oxen. So that's his handwriting on there. And so again, this is one of Mel Ayer's pictures. Okay, now this one very clearly is noted who Truman Loney is by the arrow and the word Loney. So it's kind of unusual just how small of a man he is. I don't think he could have been 5 feet tall, whereas his father-in-law Culinaires was a tall man. He was 6'4", so that had to be pretty imposing to ask Culinaires if he could marry his daughter when he was such a short little guy. But anyhow, he took over the sawmill and ran it for many years. I said in the background here, take a note of how tall that smokestack is. It's really easy to spot this mill in pictures because of how small the mill building is compared to how big that chimney is. It's just it's a monster, and so it stands out in a lot of the pictures that you'll see coming up. Again, this picture came from the Mel Ayer's collection. This is again the Truman Loney Sawmill, South Osborn. This picture was taken in 1905, that we know for a fact. And you can see my attempt at numbering all of the people in an effort to find out who they were. Unfortunately, the people that started to write these names down never finished it, and they passed away, and I still regret not following up with them sooner to get whatever information I could get. But again, this is part of the Loney Sawmill in Osborn. They sawed 1 million board feet that winter out of this little mill. And that was told to me by George Miller, whose father worked in that mill. And so he may be one of these people, I don't know. But it's part of the George Miller picture collection. Again, here's another different angle of the Loney Sawmill, taken from, I guess we'd say, the backside. This is Truman Loney is sitting on top of the horse on the very right of the picture, I suppose, so he doesn't look so short standing next to the rest of the men. But unfortunately, we don't know who the rest of the men are, but we do know, evidenced by how big that pipe is, that this is the Truman Loney Sawmill in Osborn. Later on, this mill was sold to a man named Charles Duvall. And we think that this is a picture of the Charles Duvall mill. And we noticed that the big pipe is not there anymore. And so I don't know what happened to it, but if they just maybe it fell over, I don't know. But at this time is about when Charles Duvall assumed ownership. And I guess we don't really know what time the mill finally ceased operation. We were guessing in the late teens, early 20s that it finally was dismantled and taken down. And this is one of George Miller's photos. Okay, now we're on to Unity. Unity is a little town where I grew up, and it's located right between Spencer to the south and Colby to the north, right along Highway 13. Unity is half in Marathon County and half in Clark County. So it makes it interesting when you're researching these towns of Unity, Colby, Abbotsford, and Dorchester. They all fall into the same problem. The old history of Clark County and history of Marathon County only go up to the county line, and then you have to have the other book. They just refer to, there's a few things over across the tracks, but they don't go into any detail. So made it a little tougher to find out history of these towns. But so again, Unity is located about 20 miles north of Marshfield. And it's been averaged about 350 people, give or take, for the last 50 years. And so that's the town I grew up in and was there for 38 years. We had a meat market there in town, and we suffered a fire in 2009. So we relocated between Colby and Abbotsford, where we are yet today. But from 3 years old till I was 42, I lived there. And so I got to know everyone. So I'll show you some pictures of my little town. So at one time, north of Unity, right along Highway 13, this is maybe a quarter mile, between a quarter and half a mile north, right on 13. Looking to the east, this was the sawmill, box, and veneer factory. And we know that was owned by a man named Peter Fritz. And he was very instrumental in the history of Unity. He had built the store building that was later to become our meat market, because his name was in stone right up at the top, like a tombstone. It said Peter Fritz, 1909. And so he had a lot to do with doings in the area and was a real go-getter. So in addition to owning a mercantile store, he also had this mill. And again, they made veneer. They sawed bolts and things into cheese boxes and whatever other kind of lumber they could produce there. So, and these employees, many people in the town worked at these little mills that he ran. This is probably my favorite picture of all the pictures I have in my collection. It's something we'd always hope to find. My friend Denny Keeling is a great historian of Unity, and he has a lot of things. And so this was one of our hopes someday, to find a picture of the DJ Spalding Sawmill in Unity. And he just recently, last fall, came across this picture. So it was like the cherry on top of the ice cream for the two of us, because we've always wondered if there was a picture of this mill. And so, excuse me, it's located on the south edge of Unity. There's a little bridge where the creek goes through, and at one time it was Dill Creek, and it would be dammed up in order to float logs to this mill. There's a big hot pond there, and now it's all swamp and closing in, but at one time we used to canoe and swim back there. And it was a pretty large opening when I was a kid. It's located right along the railroad tracks, as you can see on the right, part of the Wisconsin Central tracks. And this view is looking north. It kind of goes uphill and still does yet today. You can stand in the same spot and see much the same angles. When you're coming into Unity from the south, the road and the railroad go uphill. And so this mill was right by the river on the south edge of town. And that's how the town pretty much came to be. As the railroad came through from the south, it was expanding to the north. And it came through this area in about 1871, 1872. And so a few people settled here, and then they decided to put up a sawmill there. And DJ Spalding was in business with William Van Hoosier, who we talked about before, and Romeo. And the two of them had this mill. I've seen several different stories about this mill, just blurbs in the paper, in the old time days thing. And one of them said it employed 300 men. And so that was quite a feat in such a little town. But as a result, it drew a lot of people in from other areas. And as a result, the south edge of town is where Unity started, because there was a close proximity to the mill. And so a lot of the houses constructed down in that part were slab wood and junk wood that people could get for free. And so the houses were very crappy and little, and it was called Bumville or Hoboville. And there was a lot of less desirable people living in down around that area of town. So eventually the businessmen moved to the north, up the hill and over the hill, to get away from that stigma and build some better businesses and homes. And eventually this area kind of just went to the wayside. But unfortunately, I haven't done any research to tell me when this mill really ceased operation and was dismantled, or what happened to the stuff. I need to look into that, but I just haven't had time to do it. But at any rate, this is our crowning jewel of Unity and how it got started and became something. Okay, and then just recently here, a few months ago, we came across this picture. So unfortunately, this didn't make it into my History of Unity book, but it will in the next one here. I'm going to put a little Unity section in my Ripplinger and Romeo book of pictures that I have gathered since the printing of the other book. And so this one, excuse me, it very clearly says DJ Spalding on the front. So this was his company store in Unity. And we just have yet to find out exactly where it stood, but it had to be near the south edge of town where the mill started, just based on how the other buildings have been built and when. And so there's no date on this picture, unfortunately, but my friend Denny and myself were constantly looking for maps and things that'll explain just where this building was. But pretty neat all in all, because he had a lot of his own company stores. He paid his men with company script money that he had printed, and they would spend it in the company store. Yeah, so essentially he paid them with his own fake money and he got it back. And so pretty enterprising guy. So as we go forward down the road, I'll find out where this building was, and then we'll have a better idea of its purpose and when. This was a scene 2 miles south and 2 miles west of Unity, of some guys out there logging. There was no writing on the picture. It just said 1908 on the back. So I don't know who the men are in the picture. A friend of mine gave me this picture long ago, and he knows of it's of Unity because it's his uncle, but he didn't know which uncle or just which man his uncle is in the picture. So we're kind of assuming he's the man on the right holding the reins of the horse in between the two horses, but unfortunately everyone's passed away that would know this, so I still don't know. This one we do know who's in the picture, my friend Denny Keeling's grandpa, Otto, and it was a postcard. So on the back it's mailed from Unity to a man in Stratford, I believe, and it was in 1915. And that's him on the top holding the reins of the horses. And they were just, I believe, doing some logging for their own use in the area. They weren't taking them to a sawmill or anything like that, as far as we know. This photo was right in downtown Unity. Shows Frank Meyer. He lived out west of Unity, and he was bringing a load of logs into town, and the direction he's facing is north. He'd be right on the corner of Highway 13 and Highway K and P, right in downtown Unity, right at the four corners. So being that he's facing the left, he'd be heading north, probably to the Peter Fritz Sawmill, to the boxboard factory and the veneer mill there. Excuse my voice. In the background was a tavern for 100 years. And so it had different owners, and we believe at this time it was called the Forest Hotel. The bar underneath and a hotel on the top. It was finally dismantled in the mid 1980s. This is another picture of Frank Meyer. This was 1907, and they were logging north and west of Unity, and he's standing at the top of the load, or near the top of the load, with the arrow going to his face. It says Frank Meyer. It's kind of chopped off there, but and it was their largest load of logs that they hauled that winter. So they were pretty proud of that. But I don't know where they were going with it. But anyway, that was part of the Ivy Sorensen collection, and Frank was Ivy's dad. And she just passed away about 5 years ago, maybe at the age of 105. She was a school teacher in Romeo, and I interviewed her several times, and she had a mind like a steel trap. She could remember every little detail of everything. I really enjoyed talking with her. This is a picture of a man in a mill. He's cleaning up the floor and in a logging camp. We know it was postmarked 1914. I couldn't make out his name at all, but he's got an unchallengeable job there of trying to keep the floor clean with just a mop and a pail. And the dog probably digs in more mud than the rest of the men. So, okay, and here we go with Cherokee. Cherokee now was located east of Colby, about 5 miles. In the township of Hull. So it was established in 1891, and the post office anyway was discontinued in 1902. And so on this picture, you can see it's the layout of some of the things in town. The sawmill. Sawmill is on Highway N. This map here is, the top is north, and so to the right is the east there. So it's part of the Big Old Plain River that flows eventually down to Wisconsin River. But so the sawmill, and then the grist mill is the other little squared out box. There was a grist mill there also, and the same man owned both of those things. And I'll show you some pictures of him in just a minute here. But the post office was part of its history for years. As far as the building goes, the building was there for a long time. And then when it says the store and saloon, the dance hall is still there yet today. It's an old dance hall, but it's still standing. Right across the road, BSS stands for the blacksmith shop. And again, that was there until the 1980s before it burnt, and it was burnt down. And so when you're traveling east through Cherokee, the only thing really there now anymore is an implement dealer. And that's a big implement dealer on the corner. But other than that, there is not much there anymore. But interestingly, this was taken in 1901 out of a Marathon County plat book. And at this intersection that shows the road heading north and crossing the river again, that's never been a thing since forever. So in 1901, anyway, they had 2 ways to cross the river, 2 different bridges. And now where that road shows going to the north there is now the site of the Cherokee County Park. They made it into a park system in the 20s, and very popular spot to go for picnics and things now. So once the snow finally melts, I'm going to get out there and see if there's any parts of the old bridge abutment or anything visible there. But I thought it was interesting. A lot of people never knew that, including myself. So this picture here is, let's see. This is a logging camp around the Cherokee area. We noticed the man kind of in the front row, standing beneath the camp cook there. Everybody else is looking at the camera, but he's looking at something off to the left. I don't know, it must have been something pretty interesting, but On the back of this it said Schmitz and Ohlingers. Now the Ohlinger family and the Schmitz, they're very popular people in that area between Cherokee and just a little bit to the north, 2 miles, is another little community called Riverside. And that's going to be the focus of one of my other books I'm writing, will be the Cherokee and Riverside country. And so I have a lot of pictures of farming with the Ohlingers and things like that, and the schools and cheese factories and so on. But there's only a few pictures of the logging operations in that area as of yet. This picture here, let's see, this is part of the Schmidt and Ohlinger family pictures. Marlene Kaiser grew up as an Ohlinger, so she gave me this photo. It's showing some nice big straight white pine logs being skidded out, and more than likely heading to the Fred Olsen Sawmill at Cherokee. Nothing is written on the back other than the Schmidt and Ohlinger name, so we can only assume that some of the people belong to that. Oh, this next picture here, when you saw the couple slides ago that showed the layout of Cherokee, it showed the sawmill and the grist mill. So this is both of those buildings in the same photo, owned by the same man. His name was Fred Olsen. The sawmill is on the right and the grist mill is on the left. This photo was dated 1904. The sawmill was on the west bank of the Little Old Plain River. And on the back of this picture, someone had kindly written the timeline of all the different people that owned the mill out in Cherokee. And so starting in 1860 was the first mill, and it was owned by a Mr. Thrun, Thrun. I don't know his first name, it just said Mr. Thrun. Followed by Charles Taylor in 1873, he assumed ownership of the mill. And then in 1891, Paul Umhofer took possession of it, and he ran it until 1901, when E.V. Kautsky had the mill. And his name, I'll go back a couple here once quick and just show you right to the very bottom of there, it says E.V. Kautsky. So he owned 38 acres in that area in 1901, and that's when he assumed ownership of this sawmill. 1904, Fred Olsen bought it at the time of this picture, and said it was dismantled in 1929. Now, the big tall grist mill took 22 men to run that grist mill, and Fred had housing in the bottom part for he and his wife, and she did the cooking, and he let the men stay right in his home to run that mill. And so eventually the mill was dismantled and reassembled on the south edge of Colby, just a little bit on the south edge of Colby on the east side. And that later too was dismantled in the 50s, I think it said. So this picture was part of the Denny Keeling photo collection. Here's a little different angle of that same sawmill owned by Fred Olsen. It says 1900, and I don't know if I goofed up there or what, but he didn't own it till 1904, so I must have gave Don the wrong numbers there. Sorry, but Fred Olsen owned the mill, and it says he is the sixth man from the left, standing from the left. So with the hat, and he's looking off to the right there with the suspenders. That's Fred Olsen. The only other two names written on the back of this picture was it said Paul Sosma is on the far left, so he'd be the very left guy in the picture. It was Paul Sosma. And then from the right side, there's a couple guys standing near the horses. There was a Mr. Riegert and Ed Podevels are on the far right with the horses. Again, this is part of the Denny Keeling photo collection. Take a quick drink. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so this one now is part of Fred Olsen's lumber train. It was a steam engine that he owned, and he would haul the sawed lumber into towns to take it to the lumber yards for sale. And this particular photo was taken in 1917 and shows him standing in front of the rear wheel with the hat on, looking off in the distance. That's actually Fred Olsen. This train hauled 20,000 board feet on these wagons, and he made these trips quite often. It sounded like every week or so. He took lumber into Colby and Abbotsford to the local lumber yards for sale. The only other person that we know in the picture is sitting on the wood box right behind Fred, and his name is Charles Haney, Hanne. So kind of a neat picture, shows the evolution of how they got the lumber to the towns. And this was part of the Carrie Rampker photo collection. And I guess that's it. I thought there was one more, but I guess not. So I guess I'll have to turn this over to Don if he's still listening. If he didn't go to
He's still here.
You're still here.
Still
Okay,
here.
good.
Yeah, some fabulous pictures you shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
There's a lot of things running through my mind right now, but the thing that I enjoyed was the pictures, that they were all different and good scenes of different sites. You mentioned the script at DJ Spalding's shop. By any chance, is there any script in the Unity area from DJ Spalding yet or not?
I'm always on the lookout for some of that. I've seen some on eBay, but they wanted like $500 for a $1 bill, and I can't cough that up. You know, that's a little steep, but I personally don't. I've asked everybody that I interviewed. I started this back in 1999 interviewing people, and I would show them pictures of some of the lumber money and ask if anybody had ever seen that. They heard about it, but no one ever had any. So as far as I know, there's none around, but you'd think there's gotta be. I just haven't found the right person yet.
Yeah, well, we'll have to keep our eyes out.
Yeah.
Another quick question, and then I'm going to get back to the questions that people have submitted.
Sure.
Can you explain the relationship between DJ Spalding and Jacob Spalding?
DJ was Jacob's son from Black River Falls. Yeah, and they were big into Black River Falls. And a few years ago, when we had our forest history meeting there, that was extremely interesting to me because I always wanted to go to Black River Falls and do some research on DJ Spalding to find out. And one of our presenters there grew up in Unity, and he's the local historian in Black River Falls. And so I was able to meet with him, well, probably last summer, early summer. I went to Black River Falls and met with him and learned a lot about the DJ Spalding evolution into how they got here and things like that. He was a lot of help to me, but yeah, they were big lumber people in the Black River Falls area. And so he had his eye on this apparently because of there was just solid white pine in that whole Clark County area. It was just nothing but white pine everywhere. And like it was all over the place, but especially right through that area around Ripplinger and Unity, it was just virgin white pine. I have a history of Clark County and a history of Marathon County, and that's what they talk about that to no end, about the everlasting supply of white pine, you know, that
in the area,
like everywhere. It was going to last for 500 years, you know.
Yeah, would have been nice.
20.
So we've got a question from Amber Jeanette. She said, I'd love to hear how Alan got into collecting and researching all of this work. Excellent pictures and information.
Okay, well, that's a good question. We owned the meat market right in Unity. And again, it was built by Peter Fritz. I think it was about 1996. An older lady came in our store and had a postcard of the interior of our store back in 1909. And she came in, she was the daughter of Peter Fritz and had this postcard of the interior. And she came, I think, for one last ride around just to take a look at things. She hadn't been there since she was a girl. She lived in Illinois her whole adult life. And so I didn't know I was a history guy until that moment. But once she gave me that picture, I thought that was pretty neat. We kept it nice and dry and safe place. And I showed it to lots of people. And 2-3 years later, I started to wonder if there's any other pictures of the area. And so that, again, I grew up there from 3 years old. So I knew all these old timers. And as I started calling them, I'd go over there like George Miller and so on. And they had pictures. And even though everyone wasn't of Unity, but it was of Ripplinger or it was of Romeo, I gladly made copies of that stuff and went back and wrote names down and things like that. And then, of course, because everybody knew me, they'd say, oh, you should go visit Mel Ayers or you should go see George Brewer. And I would go visit, I'd call them and sure, come on over. And so I don't know right offhand, between Denny Keeling and myself, we must have 300-400 pictures of the Unity, Ripplinger, Romeo area in 8x10 format in page protectors. And then with the notes on them that we learned something, we write it on the stickers right on the page protector. So I just have so much stuff, it isn't funny. So I've always wanted to write a book. And so I finally did that. Now that I got one under my belt, now I'm trying to do 4 more. So it's pretty exciting.
And you're staying busy.
I am staying busy. That's a fact.
We have a question from John Berg. He says, in the Van Hoosier photo of the logging locomotive, is that the Wisconsin Central Railroad, or did Van Hoosier run his own private logging railroad? And which direction did it go from his mill? Let's see now. The one with the lumber piled up, I'm guessing? Is that? It would be real early in the program, 6:42, so 12 minutes in. So it would have been one of the earliest slides. Should I go back to that, or what should I do there? If you want to, if it would help to make sure that we're looking at the right picture. Here, bear with me. I'm arrowing. Yep. I just got to think about which picture we're talking about here. And we're talking about Romeo. So, like that one there, you think? I was thinking it might have been, well, I think it's the one in the woods. Oh, like this one before that yet. And John, if you're listening, you want to, we just said something. I don't know that this is the Wisconsin Central track. Very well. I mean, there's a chance it could be, but we kind of figured it was a spur into the woods just for decking logs and loading them onto the cars to bring them out to the Wisconsin Central at Romeo. But I know Tom Becker, I have a map that Tom Becker hand drew of the Romeo area, and it shows couple little side spurs going off right, to the east and the west, that eventually hook up with the Wisconsin Central. So I can only assume that if this isn't a Wisconsin Central, it's one of the spurs from either way. But John is online, and I'm going to allow him to talk. So John, if you're not unmuted, you want to unmute yourself? John? Maybe, okay. Maybe not. Huh? Nope. John, can you hear me? You should have permission to speak. Well, I apologize. I'm not That's the okay guy. So yeah, and I know John well, so we can talk later. I can. Okay, that sounds like a plan. Call me and we'll talk about it. So yeah, I can only assume that's what he's talking about. But and then one of the pictures here, this one right here, it's hard to tell in this photo because it's so white, but in the original picture, it does say Wisconsin Central on the side of that flat car. That one there does say Wisconsin Central. So we didn't know if they were decking the logs or undecking the logs. They could be bringing them to Romeo on the Wisconsin Central line, or
it could be a spur into the woods that they're allowing the Wisconsin Central car to be used for. I just don't know. And I'm not the greatest railroad guy, so I'd be the last one to ask about how the railroad works, so what they're letting their cars out to do. I don't know, but
when you and John talk, you might get a little bit more information from them. So
yeah, and I'd love to find out the answers to these. So that's the interesting thing about doing this. Hopefully some of these people have some insight into some of this stuff, but
another
yeah.
comment by Amber. Amber said, was there a preference of horse versus oxen? Seems that you can roughly tell when that time frame was based on the use of which animal. And then she said, thank you.
I've never researched just when the transition kind of took over, but it seems like a lot of the 1890s, 1880s to the 1890s are oxen. And then the horses kind of mingle in, and then eventually it was all horses, it seems like. So in my opinion, it's like 1890 was the end of the oxen. I don't know what you think, Don, but I haven't never studied that, but just the pictures I have and the dates that I know things went on are kind of coinciding with that time period,
Well, it always seems like the earlier pictures have more oxen in them.
Yes.
And that one of the advantages were that you didn't have to take special, the horses didn't have the digestive system that the oxen had. So the oxen could get by with eating or grazing a lot more than the horses could. So it was easier to provide food for the oxen. And then when they got hurt or injured, they provided food for the men in the camps too. So
right. And I often wonder if the horses did too. I don't know why the horses wouldn't become a steak or a roast.
I don't know about that one. Yeah.
I don't know. You don't hear about that, but I can't imagine they would have just left them die and lay out in the woods. I imagine.
Probably not. But the way some of the early lumbermen were with their horses and how they took care of their horses, the horses got better care than the men. So
you're right. That was a big thing. You're right.
John Berg also commented on the photos from the J Brydon collection. He said they're exquisite photos from the 1890s.
That they are. And they're dandies. and all of the pictures are great, and especially those from that Merlin Shannon collection. When I interviewed Merlin, I was there 3 different times at his house in Colby, and I'd show him my stuff, and he says, "Oh, just a minute." He says, "I got stuff you got to see." And he'd be gone for a few minutes and he'd come back with tears in his eyes. And he said, "I just can't bear to look at that stuff right now. We'll have to come back to it." And eventually he passed away. So I never got to see the pictures when they were at his home, but he passed them down to his daughter, and his daughter passed them down to a nephew who was a good friend of mine. And so I went out there a couple winters ago and we looked through, and there's a trunk full of stuff. And, just beautiful pictures preserved in that trunk. And he had World War II uniforms and everything ever happened, every letter he ever sent home. And it was, so I can see why he was so emotional with he would get looking in that trunk and one thing would lead to another, and he couldn't, it was just too much for him to take, So I wished I could have seen the pictures with him, but we just never connected to that level. But his grandson, Scott Shannon, has the pictures, and he has them in the trunk right in his living room, right in the middle of the floor. And very graciously let me make copies of all that stuff. But they're really great, clear pictures.
Okay, another question has to do with the Osborne Lumber Company. There's an Osborne Lumber Company in Rib Lake. Is there any connection to Osborne operations near Unity?
I don't even know how Osborne got its name. It was something with that book you and I looked at last week, Don, that you had that maybe shows that, but not to my knowledge, because I've heard that too. I've heard the Osborne Lumber Company in Rib Lake. My friend Denny is a big Rib Lake historian. He has a cabin or camper out on Harper Lake. And so he and Bob Rush are the Rib Lake historians of the area, and we talked about that a little bit, but never came to any conclusion that it was connected together. Just probably coincidental, as far as we know. But I could be wrong.
Then we've got a couple comments. One from a guy in Michigan, Jerry, says, great photos, Al, and that he's from Howard City, Michigan. And
I've heard of the guy. I've
I've
heard
heard
of
that guy too.
Yeah. Good looking young man.
And then Sam Karam from Minnesota, he said, great pictures, thanks for sharing. And then John Berg said, again, isn't it a gas to get this chance to talk to old or look at old photos and connect with the old timers to record their stories?
Oh yeah. I interviewed people for, I don't know, 15 years probably. And I have all the notes of the things that they told me, and I would just let them look through my photo albums. Some of these binders are 6-7 inches thick with 8x10 pictures and page protectors. So they'd look, and then I'd have my notepad there, and I would write things that I didn't know. And a lot of the stuff was only because I'm not from the area. We're not related to anybody in the Unity area. We moved here from down by Hartford when I was 3 years old. So I don't know how the families are all connected, but boy, it was interesting to me to try and piece this together, because I knew the people, but I didn't know how they were also intertwined in Unity. And especially when you got to Romeo, there's it was very confusing because of the Swedish thing there, where Carl's son would marry Ole's son, and then Carlson became Olsen, and then Andrew's son married Carl's son or daughter, and then it was Anderson. It was a lot of that. So it was very confusing, but very interesting to see how that all, because one person would say, that's my grandma. And then the other guy would say, oh, that's my grandma, but they had 2 different last names. Well, it was part of this whole hand-me-down thing where they'd switch their names depending on whose son married what daughter. So that was interesting, but confusing, but no, it's fun I interviewed probably 75 people back in the day to get the pictures I have. And unfortunately, most all of them have passed away now, but I said in my book, when I was writing that about a year ago, it was especially gratifying to reread the notes that I had taken 20 years earlier. And I can remember talking to the people, and I can remember the conversations we had as I was writing these notes, because I said, don't mind me, I'm just writing things that I don't know. It may not mean anything to anybody else, but it's important to me just to try and piece all this history together. And so thankfully I did that. And thankfully I have all those notes, because that's what I used to write the paragraphs. And even some of this here tonight, some of those things that I wrote down, I reread some of the notes that I interviewed some of the people like George Miller that gave me the pictures 23 years ago. And so even though they're not here to see this, their words live on yet in what they told me. So that's really gratifying.
We've got a comment by Amber again. This one said that her Jeanette family is from the area, specifically Spencer. In the 1880 census, my ancestor is listed as working in a sawmill. What would you suggest in how to start researching what sawmills were in the Spencer area in 1880?
Well, I know a guy that would know all of that stuff. And you know him too,
Ron
Drager.
Yeah. I'll send Amber an email.
Okay. Yeah.
Ron Drager's the expert in Spencer, and he's the guy I would recommend too.
Yeah, he's helped me out a lot because of the proximity that Romeo is kind of half Unity and half Spencer. It's kind of right in the middle. So I'm the Unity guy, and Ron is the Spencer guy, and so our territories overlap fiercely, and so we share everything we come across, but he knows all about Spencer, and so he's probably forgot more than I'll ever learn about Spencer, but that would be the man to ask, because he's got the information on the sawmilling things in Spencer. and certainly would know about Romeo if that was the case as well. You know, he would be the guy to contact about that. Very knowledgeable, very
So,
nice.
Yeah, nice guy. Amber, I'll send you
You bet.
his email address after we're done tonight.
Yeah,
And then
he'd
we
be
had a,
help with that.
all right, well, we had a couple more questions or
Okay.
comments. John Berg comment again, excellent job. Saved me a signed copy of your book. How do you get the book?
Oh, that's a good question. I have them available in several different places, including I have a stack at my own house. So they're available at Ray's Market in Colby. If you go to raysmarketsausage.com is the website. You can find out where that building's located. It's just a little bit right on the corner of Highway 13 and 29 between Colby and Abbotsford. It's where our new meat market, after we burnt down in Unity, we built here. And so I have them for sale. My brother-in-law owns the business now. I sold it to him, but I do have my books available at the store right across the road from my house here. The other place I have some is at the Unity Village Clerk's office, and also the Colby Public Library has a lot of them. I did a talk there, I don't know, month and a half ago about the book. And so Vicky's got some there, I think, yet to sell, I believe. And so, but you can also contact me as well. And the books are $25 a piece. And I've signed all of them, and I can ship them to you for about $9 in a flat rate envelope. So you can always email me, and I don't know if we have my email address written anywhere, or I can.
We don't. You want to just?
I can spell it out.
Yeah. Why don't you?
Let me go back to the very beginning here. Right here. So that's my last name is Gurtner. So my email address is my last name with an S on the end. So it's Gurtners@msn.com. So if you email me at that, I can gladly get you hooked up with a book and then go from there.
And Patty Putnam asked the question now too. Does anyone know of a family in the Spencer area named Grippentrog?
Yes.
And so that would also be a good question to ask Ron.
Yep. I know I made sausage for some Grippentrogs. There's a Greg Grippentrog. And I know
some Grippentrogs too. They had a cheese factory. So, okay.
Yep. But yeah,
we'll get hold of you, Patty.
The guy for that. I'm sorry, Don, what?
I'll follow up with Patty after this.
Oh, okay.
That was the last of the comments and questions. So,
okay.
With that, Al, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. I think everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Our next presentation will be next month, and the title is Hickory Dickory Dock, the Kewanee Logging Piers. And it's being presented by one of the state archaeologists that will talk about those logging piers. Hope you can join us then, and we'll have information on our website shortly. Thanks much, everybody. Thank you again, Al, and we will
see you, Don,
next month.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.